Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be covering chapter 1 of our book, The Art of Reasoning, and that chapter is called Classification. So, first things first, why exactly do we care about this concept? And the reason, or let's say the easiest reason we can explain why, is because as human beings we are inherently orderly. Meaning what? Meaning that we like order, we like things to be in their proper place, yes, even those of us who have very messy rooms. And we like that because it allows us to sort of understand what's going on. It allows us to know what to do in order to accomplish what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and so on. So, understanding order lets us make sense of what is going on. And this is, for example, the reason why you're not wearing underwear on the outside, unless, of course, you're Superman. So it lets us understand what this class is and what's expected for this class. What is a parent? What is a police officer? What is a president? What is a hobo? So on and so forth, right? So we like to organize these ideas so that we know how to behave in regards to each particular idea. We classify everything sort of in our heads so that we have some sense of what's up. When we do this properly, we have a much easier time making sense of the world. When we do it badly, the world doesn't seem to make any sense to us. So, starting idea is something like clarity of language is critical. Why is that? Well, that's because language is how we communicate. And in fact, language is the only way I have to get the idea that is in my head into your head, and the only way that you have of getting an idea from your head into my head. So, because ideas are not tangible things, right? They're not a can of soda. You have to use something that will take this intangible, non-touchable idea and somehow translate it to me. So, language is ultimately words plus rules. And when we say that, like, when we say words, what we mean is something like bundles of meaning that we have sort of agreed on. And quite often these ideas are fairly abstract, right? I mean, when I say dog, I could mean a Chihuahua, a Labrador, a Labradoodle, a Saint Bernard, anything else in between. And therefore we have these categories of ideas that we have somehow devised. And these words are ultimately very, very sensitive because what does and doesn't belong in a bundle can be very, very specific. So yes, dogs have 4 legs, a tail, a pair of ears, forward-facing eyes. They're natural predators. But so are cats, and all of those features are more or less the same. And in fact, you have plenty of cats that are bigger than a lot of these little designer dogs. So it's very important not to confuse the categories there. So what do I mean by words being sensitive? So let's take a word like, let's see if I can turn this thing on. 1 second. Nope, that turned it off. And here we go. Alright. So let's say we're talking about some dude named Bob. Now, if I say that Bob is what is Bob? Bob is shit. That's a very negative assessment of Bob as a person, right? It means that Bob is a bad person, or he's very bad at something that we're talking about. On the other hand, if I say that Bob is the shit, all of a sudden that is super positive. So the presence or absence of the definite particle in front of the word here in particular makes literally all the difference in what it is that we're saying. So that's what I mean by words are very, very sensitive. Now, you might be led to conclude, if English is not your primary language, that's like, okay, so if I don't have the definite particle, then it's a negative meaning. But if I do have a positive, if I do have the definite particle, then it is a positive meaning. And then all we have to do is sort of dig around a little bit, and we find out that if we have a phrase like "what the shit," we don't use this phrase for positive things, right? This is a phrase used exclusively for things have gone very wrong sort of experience, right? Like, you don't open presents on Christmas morning, see the exact thing that you wanted, and use this phrase, right? Like, no. If you do, you have misunderstood how the English language works. So we have to be very, very careful when we use language, because otherwise we end up all over the place. So when we use words, we must properly articulate the meaning that is in our heads in order for what we mean to transfer to other people, and so that we don't include things that we don't mean in that combination. So we're trying to only select the things that we want and none of the things that we don't want. So it's possible to make a mistake in our thinking, and this is where articulation of language becomes very, very useful. So occasionally we will want something that is contradictory, right? And we won't realize that the idea doesn't make sense unless we actually try to express it. You might have actually had this experience yourself. Somebody has a question, and you ask them to explain their question in more detail, maybe to give you an example or something. And as the person is talking, all of a sudden you see that they actually figure out the answer themselves. Now that means that they knew the answer the entire time. But what they hadn't done is they hadn't actually thought their way all the way through the issue. And once you force them to do that by asking them a question, asking them to explain it to you, all of a sudden they actually become cognizant of what's going on. So if you're looking for somebody who is a bachelor and somebody who is married, and you want the person to have both of these qualities, that is called a paradox, right? Meaning that these two ideas, idea A and idea B, cannot coexist in the same thing. And you know that, right? Because the definition of a bachelor is somebody who is not married, and therefore they can't also be married. So that's how you get a paradox. You can get something like a tautology. Tautology is essentially a way of saying the same thing, sort of in a circular way. You're not getting anywhere with it. The descriptor doesn't tell you anything new. So if I tell you that I'm looking for something that is round and is a circle, well, that's not very helpful, because if you're going to be a circle, you have to be round, right? So if you're looking for something that has this sort of a descriptor, then you have a tautology. Yeah, so we have to, or if I say an unmarried bachelor, that is also a tautology. So we have to be able to pick out our language so that we get all the things we want and none of the things we don't. And one of the ways of screwing that up, frankly, besides the paradox phrasing and the tautology phrasing, is when we fail to pick out anything meaningful. What I mean by meaningful is, I'm sure you've heard this from your friends. They're trying to bring up a name of some actor, and they go like, "Oh, that one movie with the thing that happens." It's like, really, the one movie with the thing that happens? Like, that is literally every movie that's ever been made. In fact, every TV show. In fact, also every book, every song, everything. So it's not very useful, even though we will use phrases like that, and occasionally our friends can actually keep up with that because they are able to engage in charitable reading, or they have some sort of insight into our thought process in advance. So what we want to do when we express ourselves is we want to make sure that we have a couple of useful features going on. The first one our book tells us is this idea of having mutually exclusive ideas. And what we mean by that is we want our ideas A and B to have no overlap. So if you imagine this as a Venn diagram, here's your side A, and you want your side B over here to be completely separate. You don't want any overlap. So when you're talking about things that are in A, everybody is absolutely positive that it can't also be part of B. A bad system is, or bad way of picking out things, are things that might be in A, but they also might be in B, and that's because there is this shaded area here. So you're never really quite sure whether what you're talking about belongs over here, or belongs over here, or it belongs maybe in the center. So you can't sort of say with certainty what exactly is going on. So you want your ideas to be separate, and that's an important point. So that's what they mean by mutually exclusive, right? So that the two Venn diagrams do not intersect, or in other words, you don't have a Venn diagram, you just have two circles. The other point that our authors bring up is that things have to be jointly exhaustive. And what they mean by that is something like if we have, whatever, 100 people at a concert, the way that you're going to describe your options has to include all 100 people, right? So, in fact, let's say it's not a concert, let's say it's a political rally, sake of argument, and so you say something like, well, you know, all the people at the rally are Nazi supporters, right? Let's take that line. Let's say we only had 100 people just to make the math easy here. And sake of argument, right, like you might have actually had, like, you know, 99 Nazi supporters. But if you have so much as one person who does not actually support Nazis, then you have a problem here. Because it means that your language picked out a person who is not a Nazi supporter and it coupled them in the same group as here. And you said that these things are now same. And that's going to obviously be a problem. Now, you'll see a lot of this kind of language used specifically for political purposes. So you can have things like, whatever, all Trump voters are Nazis, all liberals are baby killers, or they're all Marxists, or they're all fascists, or whatever the thing is, right? As a general rule of thumb, any idea that's that you can put on a bumper sticker tends to be wrong, because society is just too complex a thing to be able to put on a bumper sticker. Either way, the idea of having your concepts be jointly exhaustive is then something like, here's your group A of definitions, here's your group B of definitions, and if these two terms are jointly exhaustive, it means that there is nothing outside of this circle A or circle B. All the little individual things that exist, they have to be in one of the two circles. And when we can get that done properly, then we don't leave the option for something else to be wrong. So I'll give you an example of where that doesn't work. So let's say, for example, right now, you are wearing a shirt that is either, let me just fix this, your shirt is either blue or it is green. Right? And there's a problem here. What if you're wearing a yellow shirt? What happens if you're wearing a black shirt? what happens if, literally any other color of the rainbow. And so this is the problem of setting it up like this, right? You're either wearing blue or you're wearing green. Now, there might be certain situations where this sort of a setup is correct, but right now it's not. A jointly exhaustive way to make sure that I actually get everybody who's watching this video on their shirt color is I can say something like, you're either wearing a blue shirt or you're wearing a not blue shirt. Now keep in mind that if you're wearing a not, so for all the people who are watching this and wearing shirts, their shirt is either blue or it is not blue. And now I'm covered. And having this sort of genus element above the species down here is very useful, because what if somebody's not wearing a shirt, right? So what are my viewers wearing? Well, you're going to have shirt. You might have not a shirt. See, here we go again. See, by using this sort of setup here, A or not A kind of thing, I'm sure that I actually cover everybody. So, for example, one of the little political things that we do, we say things like, you are, for example, let's say, for Obama, or you are for, who was the other guy, Mitt Romney. And so, well, that's not really correct, though, because in that election, that's 2012, by the way, you might have been, so here are your candidates. You might have been for Obama, you might have been for Romney, but were those the only two choices we had? Like, no, there was also a third party. So it's really important to make sure that the options that we put down actually cover everybody who's under that genus, because otherwise we always run the risk of our ideas being sort of off on the side, or people understanding them in this sort of third group that we haven't actually bothered specifying section. And then you end up with all sorts of argument problems, and we'll sort of get to that down the line, but it's a bad way of setting up an argument. All right, let's see. Oh, right. The way that we set up these distinctions, the book tells us, and this is very much the case, that we have to pay attention to what are called essential qualities. And these essential qualities should allow us to pick meaningfully the one specific thing that we want to talk about, right? So if I don't know, let's say we're talking about the whatever 96 Bulls, Chicago Bulls sports team, and you say, oh, there's that they have a really great player, and somebody asks you, well, which one? And you go like, well, they're African American. It's not very helpful, is it? Because like most of that team was African American. Outside of like Tony Kukoc, I can't off the top of my head think of anybody who wasn't. So it's a bad way of singling out what you're looking for, because it doesn't give you enough specificity, right? So the idea of what is essential actually just translates into what lets you best select only that one thing you want. So you got a whole bag of jelly beans. There's like 9,000 jelly beans in there, and you tell your friend, hey, give me that jelly bean I like. And you go like, well, which one? And you go like, the one that looks like a bean. See, now looking like a bean is a quality, but it applies to too many objects in that group. In fact, it applies to all the objects in the group of jelly beans. So it's a bad way of selecting what you're looking for. But if you say, give me whatever, the purple one, now that matters. Right? When we're talking about people, we are constantly trying to figure out who we're talking about. And we talk about groups of people, right? So we talk about whatever, business owners or taxpayers or the homeless or the people who need help or very specific kinds of help. We talk about, well, frankly, everything, right? People who play sports, which sports they play, fans of which sport or not fans, or whether or not you're an addict to the sport, or whatever the case is. So you're always stuck having to very specifically pick out, like, okay, just that like one thing out of a sea of almost infinite data that is presented to us. And figuring out which qualities are essential is really a matter of being able to just narrow down the way that you express yourself so that you're only getting that one thing. So you could let's say we're making a list of greatest athletes of the last 100 years, and I tell you, oh, that I haven't told you the sport, by the way, and I tell you, oh, it's Michael. Well, which one? Because we got Jordan, we got Tyson. In fact, I'm pretty sure we got a couple more in there, right? But these are very different sports. So that means that this Michael isn't essential enough to what we want. Or at least it's not by itself. Now, if I tell you that we're going to talk about basketball, and I tell you that we're going to talk about the 1900s, the 1990s, apparently I can't read or write today. What? Right. We're going to talk about basketball in the 1990s in the U.S. And then I tell you that the greatest player there is a dude named Michael. Like I'm giving you a lot of hints here as to who I'm going to be picking out. So this helps. Every one of these, right, is a genus that's going to have additional little subsections under it. So you can say something like athlete, and then you pick your sport, which is basketball, and then you pick your time period, which is the 90s, and then you have dudes named Michael down here. And there is not a lot of them in that category. In fact, this is why we use last names these days, because when you say Michael Jordan and you combine that with basketball, 90s in the US, right, it's a lot easier to pick out the one specific thing that you want. Alright, so our book points out that in many cases, for example, using things like color is not a very useful way to identify objects, the same way that using shapes may not be, but all of this is always a matter of function, right? Or if you prefer, how well that thing is going to work, which is why our definition up here is what lets you best select only the thing that you want. Right, the word best here being absolutely crucial. So using colors to select things out of groups is probably not very useful in a lot of cases, but if we're trying to figure out whether this particular snake that we're looking at is poisonous, color is probably a very important factor, because the color of the snake is related to what kind of a snake it is, and that lets us know whether or not it is poisonous. Without having to get bit to find out, and that might matter in Florida. So that's in essence the sum of the entire first chapter. It's this idea that we have to be careful about our language, because we have to take our ideas from our head and give them to other people, because that's the only way that we can in fact share ideas. The way that we use language can be very, very sensitive based on the exact sort of a setup of the meanings of those words, because language is ultimately words plus rules, and rules do a whole lot of work. So in order to make ourselves understood, we have to articulate our thoughts to the best of our ability. That allows other people the best possible chance to actually understand us. It does not mean that they will actually understand us, because ultimately you cannot express yourself so clearly that somebody can't screw it up if they're failing at their job bad enough. Right, so these are our three big features that we want to care about. We want to make sure that our terms are always mutually exclusive, so that we don't interfere in the other ideas that we have. We want to make sure that the terms we use are jointly exhaustive, because otherwise you are going to end up making assumptions about things that you really shouldn't be making. And finally, we want to make sure that we focus on essential qualities, which are the ways that will best allow us to select the things that we want to talk about, and none of the other things. And that always depends on the context in which we are speaking. So be aware of the context. I believe that about covers it. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Leave the comments down below, and I'll see you all next time.